Okay, so here we are in a new meeting of Infusion Network, and this time we have Professor Felix de Mendelssohn with us to talk about dreams and innovation. So thank you, Professor Felix, for being here with us.
Yes, thank you very much for inviting me. I'll introduce myself briefly. I'm a psychoanalyst and a group analyst working in Vienna and in Berlin, and also teaching. And I'm not just interested in the privateness of therapy, but also the social uses of some of the things that we've been discovering in our field. And since we're talking especially about innovation and dreams, I want to explain a little about the field that I'm working in now that is appropriate, called social dreaming. Because this is a method which is not so much for individual therapy, but more for understanding groups, organizations. They could be business firms, universities, hospitals, and how they work unconsciously, below the level of what we think is management and organizational skills. There's a deeper level in the dreams that people may be having and how we can look at that and examine them. Now, all this started with a man called Gordon Lawrence in England in the 1970s at the Tavistock Clinic as a management consultant. Maybe two things kicked him off which were important. One was a manager who told him a dream of his, and the manager said he had a repetitive dream that he went to work every morning and he went through a cemetery where people were buried, burial place. And this kept repeating itself. And when they discussed it, it became clear this man was very concerned that the firm was going to go bankrupt and be killed, but none of his colleagues wanted to listen to this. In fact, he turned out to be right. And this impressed Gordon Lawrence. And the other thing that struck him was a very interesting book by a woman called Charlotte Berath, who later worked for Hannah Arendt in New York. It's called The Third Reich of Dreams. And Charlotte Berath spent the 1930s in Berlin, and she collected dreams from everybody around her, from the cleaning lady, from the grocer's shop, from whoever she knew. And in this collection of dreams, some things about the Nazi regime in those years becomes very, very clear, just how much repression, just how much anxiety, things that people wouldn't talk about or too afraid to talk about during the daytime, they would dream about at night. Just for an example, one cleaning lady had a dream where she could speak only in Russian, which was a language she didn't understand, but she had to speak Russian so that nobody else would understand her, and she wouldn't even understand herself, because otherwise it could be a state secret and the state could report her. So many kinds of paranoid dreams also about deportations. And it became clear to Charlotte Berath that in this dream life that was going on, people knew much more about what was going on in the Nazi regime than they would admit to in the waking life. So Gordon Lawrence, this a British management consultant, started to make what he called a social dreaming matrix, which is a group of people. A matrix is like a womb, something that can give birth. And the method is simply that people discuss the dreams they've had recently. But they don't interpret them individually. They don't ask each other questions. What does this mean to you? Or what does that mean to you? They just free associate. So you tell me a dream and it reminds me of something I saw on TV last night, or it reminds me of another dream I once had, or I associate something I read in the newspaper. So people associate to these dreams. They belong to the group. They're no longer your individual dream. It's part of the matrix. And if you do this regularly over a period of time, the collection of dreams that you get and the way they're discussed have to do with what you might call the psychological or psychosocial stability of the organization and the conflicts that may be lying under the surface. And it makes it easier for people to talk about these things because, after all, they're only dreams. So it also gives another level where these things can be dealt with that isn't so pressing and with the constant call to action. And we've been using this in various settings. We use it in mental health institutions, in universities like my own. At conferences, it's a very useful method. People come to a conference, and if you do a social dreaming and collect their dreams, you will get a lot of their unconscious expectations and anxieties. This conference is going to be very boring. There are going to be too many people speaking a language I don't understand. I won't find my way around the building. it's interesting what comes up in the dreams that has to do with this particular situation. Why is this conference being held? What is its aim? Some of these things come up in dreams in a way that they couldn't come up in the normal daytime presentations. So this is basically the method I'm working with, and also with business people. And I'm interested to see how it connects with other systemic concepts that will be happening at the conference in Vienna in July. So that's more or less the field that I'm working in now, connected with our topic. And I'm wondering if people are joining this conversation or have any dreams they'd like to report, or any questions about this method, how we use it, where we use it, what we do or don't do, then please let me know. Anybody around? Not yet.
No, not yet. There are some people that are seeing your presentation. We can ask them to make their questions both in the Hangout page,
Yeah.
or in the application that it's for questions, or
Well,
they can also
a bit more about dreaming in general, because I've just published a book in German. It's called The Man Who Owed His Life to a Dream. And I discuss many aspects of dream interpretation from way back before Freud to way after Freud, with neuroscientific research and other forms of understanding dreams. And one aspect that I just thought of is dreams of prominent people, famous people, politicians, film stars, whoever. I regularly have dreams about jazz musicians, people like Sonny Rollins or Chet Baker, whom I saw live in my youth and who were heroes of my youth. But very often you find dreams of people you don't like. A famous example was the German philosopher Hebel, writer Hebel, who kept dreaming about Napoleon. And he wrote to a friend of his and said, I dream of Napoleon becoming crowned emperor. I dream of him at Waterloo. I dream of him in exile on St. Helena. Why do I keep dreaming of this man? I don't even like him at all. But actually, as we know from many psychiatric cases of people who are in mental hospitals and think they're Napoleon, it's a very attractive image of being all powerful and then of losing your power. So there's some kind of identification there between Hebel and Napoleon. And when I was working as a therapist here in Austria in the 1990s, 80s and 90s, there was a very right-wing politician, Jörg Haider, who was for the Popular Party, very against foreigners, very restrictive, very right-wing. And many of my patients, I myself, had dreams about him. And in the dreams, he was quite friendly. So it's like a part of yourself that you don't really like, that you can't deal with, that wants success, that is maybe racist or xenophobic. Or another woman I know dreamt of Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, I think, a famous couple with a big marriage, and she didn't like them. She thought they were terrible people, but somehow they attract you in the dream because you see a split off part of yourself, something that you actually want to be part of in a way. So this is another thing to look at, what kind of people appear in your dreams and why.
And when you talk about dreams, it's dreams where you are totally, where you are totally asleep?
Yes.
Or this kind of also
daydream. I think because in the Russian language, there's a different word for these two. They talk about night dreams. To make it clear, it's a dream you have while you're asleep, which is what I'm really talking about. Because daydreams are more simple. They're usually pretty escapist. And you're sitting in a boring meeting or something and you daydream you're on the beach in Tahiti or Goa or somewhere, or you daydream you just won the Nobel Prize, or you daydream that attractive man standing over there in the corner of the party will come up and kiss you and say you're beautiful. So they're simple wish fulfillments that we usually resort to get out of a boring or embarrassing situation. Night dreams are more complicated, because they seem to bind in many things that happen during the day, conflicts that I'm involved with now, and compare them to things that happened in my childhood or in other times. You see, a lot of the thought has gone into, why do we dream at all? What's the genetic function and purpose of it? And one interesting thing is that, as far as we know, fish don't dream, but birds do dream. And that's a jump in evolution, because the fish swim around in the water. They don't need to orientate themselves very much. But the birds fly, and they have to look over the country that they're flying. So one idea is that dreams originally start as a way of orientating yourself geographically when evolution needs it. And you can check this quite easily if you go on holiday somewhere. Let's say you go for 3 weeks to Mallorca. You'll find the first week or two you're dreaming of back home, where you live, Vienna or Berlin, where you set off from. And usually you're frustrated and angry because you're in this nice place where you want to have a holiday and be on the beach. But in your dreams, you're back home running to the shops or in your office or something. When you come back home, you start to dream of Mallorca, and you dream of little alleyways and the terrace you used to sit in and the wine you used to drink. So one idea is we're mapping these things in our mind. We're trying to orientate ourselves. Where are we exactly now? Can I compare this situation to other situations I've been in? And of course, this function, which was originally just a geographic one, where am I, what are the landmarks, becomes, I think, a social one, because our world now is not so much a place of landmarks, but a place of culture. So what's happening in my work? How do I orientate myself with my colleagues at work for the tasks we have to do? What's happening in my family? How do I orient myself with my parents, my children, my wife? Or in my sports team or whatever. These things come back into our dreams because we're trying to compare experiences with other experiences and get a kind of orientation where we want to go. And that's why this is very useful in organizational work as well, because some things come up there which aren't so rational, but which are very powerful in moving things along.
And can you just share, how can you apply it? How could it be to use this tool in an organization, for example?
Well, then there's a question of if you have the right hierarchies or people to take action on what's going on. This is an exploration, and then you still need the traditional structures. There's an interesting experiment done at a university in America, which Gordon Lawrence, in his book Social Dreaming at Work, describes at length, where they had started a new program for students at the university. And then they did social dreaming matrices. And a lot of these dreams were about intense anxiety of having to do things which were too difficult. And it was just all sorts of situations where you had to do something, cross a bridge that was very shaky, or climb a mountain and be afraid of slipping off. And they associated these dreams, and the associations that came up were the students weren't properly prepared for the course. They were being asked all sorts of questions and examinations that they had no preparation for. And as a result, the university changed the curriculum and gave a new curriculum which gave the students more preparation. So I think we're discovering things in these social dreaming matrix which call for change, and we need change. Can we identify the people who should bring about these changes, so that people feel more engaged in their work, more part of a team, less displaced? These are things we find out.
Mm-hmm. So as far as I understand, as it is a free association, there is no any kind of first orientation or indication. It starts just sharing.
Just dream sharing. And if you share, I mean, I share you a dream, like the last dream I can remember, I dreamt I was sitting in a cafe in Berlin, and I realized behind me, again, the jazz musician is sitting Miles Davis, who's actually been dead for a long time. And I turn around to look because he's sitting with his back to me, and I see he doesn't look like Miles Davis. He's fat and big, has his graying hair, but he is Miles Davis. And then I turn back again, and then he takes his trumpet out and he blows just one note, really beautiful note. I was very happy with this dream because I woke up and you needed no more than this one musical note. So obviously this dream meant something to me about simplicity or finding the one thing that was important for me. But if I share this dream, then somebody else may come up and say he remembers a Miles Davis concert where the police had to come because a fight broke out between the Hells Angels and somebody else. And then somebody else will say his cousin was in the Hells Angels and told him a lot about how these things. So it sort of moves around, but it's like taking the free associations, the latent thoughts of many people in the group. And then out of this material, you realize that there are things going on in the unconscious of this group of people, like a possible fear of violence, and maybe with the beginning dream, the Miles Davis dream, the idea of something very individual. If we look at organizations, some organizations don't have enough cohesion. They don't stick together. The team is too divided, too full of conflicts, and what they're looking for is to be more of a unit. In other organizations, it's the other way around sometimes. Everybody is being forced to be a unit, and there's not enough room for individuality because people need their individual creativity, their space, they're using their ideas. This sort of thing will come up in the dreams. And you will find out more, are these dreams about being individual, doing your own thing, or are these more dreams of coming together as a group and doing something creative, or being frightened that the group could become destructive? So if we take our time with them, we learn a lot from these dreams and from talking about them together. So the format is usually we do 1 hour where we sit, and we sit in a special way. We have a spiral. We don't put the chairs in a circle where everybody can see everybody else. We make a spiral because in that way you're sitting in a group, but you don't see everybody. You see somebody's shoulder or somebody's behind or the back of his head. You're with people, but you're also to a certain extent in yourself, which is important for the dreaming and for remembering the dreams. And then you spend 1 hour just telling dreams and associating, and then you take a little break, and then you have another hour processing this, looking through, trying to understand where connections could be, or bringing it more back to your work or conference situation that is holding this event. I can't hear you now. Hang on.
Yes, I can close my micro.
Yeah.
Yes. Then as far as I understand, if you are meeting the people in a context that there had some kind of sense for them, and that what we are, for example, we are in a conference.
Yes.
And this is the first day of the conference. Yes. And we are sharing all these dreams.
Yes.
So people was not in the conference before dreaming. We are talking about the dreams of yesterday or 2 days before. Or,
yeah.
Okay, no? So somehow, do you have any kind of theory or how, if the dreams are like information that each individual has, but the way this information connects regards to the context, or how do you say?
There's an American called Edgar Casey who wrote a lot about these things, and he said, dreams are the answers of today for the questions of tomorrow. So there's some idea that if you know something is coming, if I know I'm going to this conference, even the dreams I have 2 weeks beforehand will have maybe something to do with this conference. I mean, it's not just the dream you're having there and then, but this leading up to it where you're expecting something, that all has a part in it. And when you start to tell this in the group, other people may be reminded of dreams they had 10 years ago, but it doesn't matter because it's connected through the association to this dream about the conference. It reminded me, we had a big world conference of psychotherapy in Vienna, maybe 15 years ago, where people came from all over the world, 4,000 people at this huge conference from many different countries. And I did a social dreaming event there, and it was very interesting because many of the participants came from America, from the USA, some also from Latin America, who were children of refugees from the Nazis and who'd gone there during the 30s or escaped. And for many of them, it was the first time they'd come back to the place where their family originally came from and where they were kicked out of or gassed or killed by the Nazis. And a lot of them brought in dreams about Nazi Germany, about being persecuted for being Jewish, things like this. But then there were Japanese there who had nothing to do with this history, and the Japanese were fascinated by Johann Strauss and Mozart and Schubert, and they had dreams about the nice Baroque palaces of Vienna and the golden age of classical music. So you see, people came with different expectations, and it was very interesting because in this work we learned a lot about each other as well. And I think in these short social dreaming seminars, people connected with each other and with their different cultures and their expectations of coming to this event, much more than they would just by sitting and listening to lectures or having intellectual discussions. It was the emotionality, the way they connected to this place and this event, you know, what their hearts were looking for in a way, was much clearer. And their anxieties, the things that really frightened them, came up. And this was very new for many people. The Japanese didn't realize just how affecting this was for American Jews to come to Vienna or to Berlin or places like that and revisit these places. And they didn't realize what this place meant for the Japanese, that they had a complete different picture, and from many other countries. So the whole multicultural aspect of this conference, where we had medicine men from African countries, shamans from Mongolia, all sorts of different people came. That got very mixed up in these dreams, and you could see that one of the tasks here was not just to discuss psychotherapy, but to really understand what the process of globalization is all about, which means really understanding local things and not just global things.
Mm-hmm. Yes, what you said had a lot of sense for me, because in one workshop we have been this weekend, someone shared this thing you said about the dreams and the questions and answers. Not, he said that he has been visualizing the last days in his meditation practice, yes, a very clear image, but he didn't know what does it mean.
Yeah.
And then in some of the work we made in the workshop, he got the question. So, and he said this way: I found the question to the answer I already had.
Yes, yes.
Yeah? So it's this what you were sharing about.
That's actually an old Jewish joke. It reminds me of a student in the yeshiva where they have to study all complicated problems about the Talmud. And the student suddenly says, I found the answer, I found the answer. And then suddenly he says, but I've forgotten the question. What was the question? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So you said that when we are applying it, there is like this free association dream from 1 hour.
Yeah.
And afterwards, after a break, there is a kind of working with what emerged.
Yes, a kind of processing it, maybe going through it a bit chronologically, because you have to bring your organizational mind or your structural mind to bear, because this is a lot of very unconscious, bizarre material. So one of the ways of dealing with this is to look chronologically. What was the first dream that was reported? Where did the associations go? In remembering it together, sometimes new associations come up, but you start to see where was the tendency. People started off with rather nervous, anxious dreams, and then they got even to violent situations. But the last dreams that were reported seemed to show some kind of peacemaking process. Or the other way around, things started off very peaceful and then got more and more conflicted. And what were the images that occurred? People may sort of dream of, I don't know, ISIS troops or some terrorist or guerrilla, and then other people will have different associations to them. Later on, you'll see you've been dreaming about a conference and an organization, and this refers to perhaps particular groups or subgroups that some people feel are terrorizing the organization, or certain kinds of leadership that aren't really getting you where you want to go, or restraining you where they should be leading you on. But the very fact that these things occur in the images of dreams makes it much easier to talk about them. It's very hard just to criticize the boss and say, you're doing a bad job. But if I have a dream of, I don't know, Winston Churchill in the war making difficult decisions, there's a metaphorical, a level of symbolism that many people can understand, and then you can relate it to the organization itself. So it's a very big learning process, and it gets people more sensitive to the fact that they have a lot of feelings going on inside, which usually their everyday work doesn't allow them to find a proper expression for. And it's very helpful to find expression in a group of other people doing the same thing, because you take it more seriously, and you suddenly discover your dreams have a meaning which is more than just for you yourself. It takes on meanings for other people or for the group or the organization you're working with.
And some kind of guides or things to take in mind when you make this second process, because I wonder that depending on how you facilitate this second round, you can guide or you can overinterpret some things, or which could be good ways to do it.
Yes. Well, I think the important thing is to see it as a social process and not an individual process. So I would try as little as possible to interpret individual dreams as having much to do with individual, but seeing how this different combination, you might say, on the whole, there were dreams full of anxiety and persecution, but there were a few pleasant dreams where women played an important part. And this might start people thinking when you point this out. I mean, I don't know the organization personally myself where I'm doing this that well. I'm not so involved in it, but I learn about it as I go along, because I say, well, 70% of the dreams you told were about anxious situations and being persecuted, but 30% seemed to be pleasant dreams, and they involved women with a kind of motherly approach. And people will associate and say, well, that's my organization. That's exactly our organization. Because there's an awful lot of conflict and a lot of unhappiness. They're men in rivalry, but there are 2 or 3 people on the team, and they're mostly women who have a very calming influence. And this is something people have sensed for a long time, but they haven't expressed it in that way. But if they're sitting there as a group and they can realize it together, it creates more capacity for action. We've been dreaming the same dream in some way, or the same dreams together. So we're more inclined as a team to take some kind of action on this, to respect the women who are giving us better inputs, and for maybe the men who are fighting out the rivalries to relax a bit and see how much they're poisoning the organization by their competitiveness all the time. So these are many different things we can learn from examining the dreams, from studying them.
And now, what are the challenges you're facing now in your work, in your research? What are the new steps?
Well, I mean, some things are just forced upon by the times. The crisis. I mean, everybody talks about the crisis. And interestingly enough, somebody gave me a dream the other day, which he interpreted himself as to do with climate change. He dreamt of Europe, and Europe was a mega city. It was a huge city covering the whole of Europe, but it was under threat from outside. So there had been a big dam, a wall built through the Mediterranean Sea to protect southern Europe, to protect Italy and Spain from the south. And he said he thought this had something to do with climate change, because Europe had become a mega city and industrialized, and they had to keep the nature out and so forth. But I thought this dream had a lot to do with the economic crisis as well, because it is southern Europe that is really endangered by the EU policies and everything, and the idea of the mega city. So these are things that come up just generally, just a casual dream. But I noticed that the economic crisis affects people in many different ways, and they're bringing more and more pictures of this up in their dreams and how it affects them. And what are the solutions? Because some people are telling you to survive the economic crisis, you have to rely on yourself, resilience, self-help. It's a bit of a capitalist method anyway. It's up to you, you make it or break it or whatever. But other people in their dreams, for instance, will bring in more the idea of making alliances, finding friends. I mean, what do you do if you're in an organization which you feel is doing something immoral or should change its policy? Do you blow the whistle and maybe get kicked out or get mobbed by everybody else for just saying it's on your own? Or do you look for people who agree with you or who will support you and create a subgroup? And then you may have one subgroup that wants change and another group that wants everything to stay as it is. So you need a third subgroup that mediates between the two of them, what we might call a sophisticated group, which sees that there's one group that wants immediate change, there's another group that doesn't want to give an inch. How can we find common ground? And these images can all come up through looking at your dreams and seeing their different strategies of dealing with crisis, emotional crisis, economic crisis, social crisis, the refugee crisis, unemployment. There are many different answers that may come up there. And basically, I think it's very important for people to share these hopes and fears with each other in a context which is away from normal life. It's a bit like an incubation center. Yes, it has something like in the ancient Greeks and Romans had special temples where you would go to have healing dreams. They called them dream incubation. So you would spend 2 or 3 nights there and go through your dreams, and someone would help you, the oracle or the priest, to make sense of your dreams. And I think we're creating sort of social dreaming temples which are removed from everyday life, where you discover that your dreams do have a meaning, not just for yourself, but for everybody else around. And you can use them creatively, which most of us are too busy to do in our normal life. I think we know much more about things in dreams. In my last book, I have a whole chapter about creativity in dreams, because innovation is one of the things we're also thinking about. Did you know that the sewing machine was invented through a dream? The inventor of the sewing machine had a dream which finally gave him the idea to make this thing work and change the lives of millions of people. And there are different examples, from physicists like Einstein and Niels Bohr to musicians like Paul McCartney and others who get the ideas, or Robert Louis Stevenson, for their stories or their songs or their films out of dreams. I'm reading Federico Fellini's Dream Diary, a fascinating book full of he makes sketches. They're all very, very sexual. They're mostly about having sex with Anita Ekberg and feeling very guilty towards his wife, Giulietta Massina, whom he was obviously very fond of, but was always cheating on all the time with different women. And you feel the dreams go into the films and the films go back into the dreams, because he dreams a lot about people he works with on the film sets and the conflicts he has with them. Yeah. And then you find images from his dreams going straight into the films. So I think people with a certain kind of creativity have a lot of interest, and they cultivate this, they take an interest. Kafka was another person who noted down his dreams and thought about them a lot and used them as material, creative material. And I think you can do this in business, in work, in organizations too, if you want to be creative there.
Okay, so Maria Piel from Sweden re-asks about these people that it's dying in the Mediterranean. That's something that you brought in this Mediterranean wall.
Yes.
Dream.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. What was the question?
Well, the question is about the people that is dying in the Mediterranean.
Yeah. I mean, this is once again a question of Europe, and that's why this dream as a megacity has some kind of meaning as well. Can Europe come together just to defend itself against the outside world, or can it create some containment, some system of working with this? Because nothing has worked so far, so it's a definite sign of crisis. And just until a week or two ago, European governments were mostly saying nobody else should be let in, we're just kind of ignoring the problem. But it's reached such a stage with so many people dying that it's not possible to do this anymore. It's a real human catastrophe on our own borders or in our own countries. So this is a tremendous question for European unity, and can we forge a common policy? And I think it's just as important as the Euro crisis or anything else. It's about the existence of Europe in a kind of liberal democratic form, and what's the best way to deal with this.
Okay, another question that comes to me is about the quality of dreams.
Yes.
So if there is any kind of differences in the way we dream due to our style of life,
Yeah.
and this constant impact of information, of technology, of the deepness of the dreams by
Yeah.
themselves, no?
Yes. But when you mention technology, one thing I've noticed is that machines and gadgets come into dreams more and more. It's usually the iPhone, the mobile phone, sometimes it's the computer. 20 years ago, people would dream more of cameras and video recorders. I think these dreams always have a sense of your own sense organ, your sense of memory, your sense of being able to save data or observe things is projected into a machine. And usually these dreams are anxiety dreams. You've lost your mobile phone. You can't, or it doesn't work. You're trying to get through. So they have a lot to do with communication. But if we use all this technology to symbolize our communication, which may be much closer to home, you know, I'm having difficulty talking about some problem with my wife, about the family, but I will dream. I try to reach her on the mobile phone, but I can't get her number, or she's constantly engaged, or something like this. So then I have to think about what have I projecting onto this technology to solve, which is actually more to do with my inner organs and perceptions. For instance, you dream that your computer goes wrong, or I mentioned this dream at the beginning of our conversation of a sound technician at the radio station in Berlin, where I gave an interview, who had a nightmare dream that the buttons on his console for doing the sound got more and more and more, and there were more and more buttons, and he woke up in a nightmare sweating because constantly new buttons were coming. But this is not just a dream about him and his profession, which is getting more and more technologically automated. It's also about all our society, as if we're all dealing with the fact that there's always new gadgets, always new instruments we have to keep learning to press, and more buttons keep appearing. And what are we actually putting out into these dream images of what is something to do with how can I deal with my personal life? How have I got it organized? Do I find enough time for myself to regenerate? Do I have enough good times with my kids or my family? Or, you know, is it all work and no play? All of these themes will come up in the dreams much more clearly often than I can think of them during the daytime.
Okay, so just to go finishing.
Yes.
It was this question of I guess that from our style of living, we don't sleep so deeply as before.
Yes.
So we have this cut sleep, and I don't know if you know how this is producing some kind of difference in the dreams, or in the quality of dreams, or just remembering the dreams, or
Yeah. There's been a lot of research done on that, and we know that certain types of people remember their dreams better than others. People who are very extroverted and very much in the outside world with a lot of business aren't so good at remembering their dreams, which may be to do with the fact that you have to spend some time when you wake up in the morning thinking about it. If you just hear the alarm and jump up and rush under the shower, you're not going to remember your dream so well as somebody who lies in bed a bit and waits and gives time for it to come. People who remember their dreams better are usually quite unconventional people who live different kinds of lives. They're often very sensitive. People can't deal a lot with practical things. So there are different types, but we can train ourselves, of course, to remember our dreams if we want to do that. But it's interesting you say about how we sleep, because if you think back 200 or 300 years ago when we had no electricity, and we see that also in peoples in the Amazon or Papua New Guinea. They sleep in a big compound all together, maybe 50, 70 people, and they're all sleeping together. And they don't sleep so deeply. They keep waking up every 2 or 3 hours. They wake up because a baby cries, because a wild animal is shouting outside. And in these times when they wake up during the night, they tell each other their dreams. They also do other things. They go and have sex in the bushes with somebody, or they steal from each other, or they do all kinds of things. But we see a society where dreaming and waking move in and out of each other much more. So dreams are taken much more seriously there, because you wake up out of a dream, you'll tell it to your neighbor, they will tell you a dream, and you feel life is partly your dream images. And we have a much more rigid system due to electricity, electric light, work schedules, So we have this time for sleep, and then we're expected to bounce back into waking life. And I think we've lost the connection there to a deep part of ourselves that we should try to find again.
Okay, so just a practical thing for this practice we want to do in the different local nodes,
Yes.
trying to reproduce this social dreaming exercise.
Yes.
The spiral, for example, has some kind of sense, or it's the same if it's clockwise or anti-clockwise?
Well, that's an interesting question, because if you set up the chairs and we sit in them, and then we look at what happens for an hour, it would be interesting to see if the energy comes from the middle point and spreads outward, or if the energy comes from outwards and moves inward. That might say something about the conference or the organization that this is happening in too, where it comes from. We don't decide that in advance. We don't know.
It doesn't matter if it's left side espiral or right side. No.
Maybe somebody will have a good idea about it. I mean, we're putting our creative minds together, and somebody may have an association to something which helps us see that it was important that it was on the right or the left side, or where different people were sitting and how they influenced with their dreams the other people on the other side or not. So that plays a certain part. Yeah.
Okay, so thank you so much,
Well,
Felix, for sharing with us your research, and we'll do this exercise in the first week of June.
Okay.
This exercise in different nodes. We'll see what emerges, what comes up, and we'll see you in the conference in Vienna in July.
Okay, and if you do have dreams, let me just add, make notes and think about certain things. Where is the dream, the localization, houses, landscapes, any objects in the dream, any people you know or people you don't know but remind you of people in the dream. Are you active in the dream, or are you just observing? What's your role in the dream? If you can make some notes on this, it helps, because you start to think more about it and how you built this dream up together. Yeah? Okay. So thanks. All the best. Looking forward to seeing you all. Yeah. Bye.
Yes, thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.